And here's then we've got a little wall of fame. If you're a Kirshner, then you qualify to be up here. This is Karen's Uncle Sam. That's one of Betty's older brothers. Lives in California now with his wife, Norma. Anyway, this is a beautiful painting that Betty did. Let me get a light on. You can see it. It is gorgeous. I love the blues. Got a bath here. And then this is one of my favorite paintings, my all-time favorite. How pretty that is. And look, oh, Buster's boy. Little baby Buster. Baby, Buster boy. Down here is the basement, and Sam's Betty's down here. These garments that Betty got some time ago when she and Sam traveled to Japan. It is gorgeous. Beautiful wall decoration. There are Betty's portraits and many of her paperweights. Karen has gotten several of these for her when she does her many travels overseas. In fact, we can get a picture of Betty here. There it is. She has on that very gown I just showed you. Very pretty. This is Mr. Samuel Kirshner, and he's the owner of this home along with Betty. And Sam, first of all, we're very honored that you would sit down with us. And we want to take you back to Altoona, Pennsylvania. Could you give us the date and when you were born, please?
I was born August 7th, 1925. I believe it was a Friday, somewhere around 2 o'clock in the afternoon at the Altoona Hospital.
Now, I hear that you were...
the only tumor ever born.
That's right. That's what I wanted to ask you about. What was that story about? Your mother said that...
My mother was probably in 1925. My mother was in her late 30s. And after many, many years of trying to have other children, with now, in 1925, was now 13 years since my sister Miriam was born, she was told she could not have children. She went to professors in Philadelphia and in Altoona, doctors in Altoona, and to the Philadelphia General Hospital. She thought she was pregnant. They told her she had a tumor and needed an immediate operation. One of the doctors was Professor Babcock of the Philadelphia General Hospital at the University of Pennsylvania. A relative of my mother's, and she had quite a few of them in Philadelphia, recommended that she see a bright young doctor that she was very fond of. And my mother was very annoyed, because after all, she saw Professor Babcock. What would this young schnook have to say against Professor Babcock? So, but the cousin prevailed, and she went to see Dr. Mazur, and he examined her and said, I know what Dr. Babcock told you. I disagree with him. I think you're going to give birth to a baby. Wait a few months, and you may have a baby boy or a girl. And she said, oh, you're crazy. Babcock said it. The tumor has to be out. He says, well, you can have the operation, and they'll tell you it was a tumor, and you'll never know the difference.
Mm-hmm.
But if you wait, you may have a child. And sure enough, she finally listened, went back to Altoona, and gave birth to the tumor. And here I am.
Oh, wow.
And several years later, when I was about 2 years old, my mother took me to Philadelphia with my sister, and we visited Dr. Major. I guess we should have visited Dr. Babcock. That would have been more fun. So we visited Dr. Major, and he paraded me around his waiting room in front of a lot of women waiting for treatment.
Yeah.
He was a gynecologist. He paraded me around, held me up, and says, "This is my tumor."
Oh, that's great. It's a great
That's
show.
how I was born.
That's beautiful. Now, how was it as a youngster growing up in Altoona? Was that an ideal place to be brought up as a child?
I don't know whether it was ideal or not. I didn't know the difference from one way or another way. When I was born, my father and mother were pretty well off. My father owned a feed store right in the center of the main corner of the downtown section of Altoona. Horses and animals were very popular, and he had been making a very good living selling feed to people with horses.
Yeah.
But of course, by the time 1925 was rolling around, there were more automobiles coming. He should have converted his property into a gas station, but either
Maybe he didn't see it.
maybe he didn't see it, maybe he didn't know, but somebody later did.
Yeah.
And suddenly the depression of 1929 hit us, the stock market crash. But the depression really didn't hit us until it was about 1930, 31, and after that. And my father lost his savings, which were basically tied up in the Altoona Savings Bank.
Right.
They went broke, never got any money out of it. I think 20 years later, they may have gotten 2 cents on the dollar.
Oh, boy.
I don't remember the amount of money, but in those days, it was a substantial amount, probably in the area of $10,000. As a result of that loss,
That he had in the bank?
yeah,
Wow.
as a result of that loss and the depression that resulted from the stock market crash and so forth, my mother and father lost their home that they had built on 18th Street, and they lost several other houses that they owned up on what used to be called Jew Hill on the top of the 15th Avenue Hill, near Garfield Elementary School.
Yeah, Karen and I went there.
Right. The home he had built at the bottom of the hill, we moved into when I was about a year old. It was built to my mother and father's specifications. It was the first split-level house I ever saw because the entrance and a store leased to the Schaefer food markets. There were about 50 or 60 of them in the Altoona area. Schaefer's gave my mother and father a long-term lease at very low rent, and my father and mother, because of the loss in the bank, were later on forced into bankruptcy by the circumstances, had to sell their houses or give them up to the bank for the mortgages. I think
They own more than one home?
they owned about 3, maybe 4, and that was the loss. At that point, shortly after the house was sold, put back to the bank or given back to the bank, we moved into a house about a block away on the corner of 18th Street and some alley. At that point, things were real bad, and it wasn't a joyful time for any of us.
Yeah.
Up until about 1930, we lived pretty well. We never wanted for anything. My sister and I were always dressed as the best that could be found. And then the Depression hit.
Well, I was going to say, before the Depression, it sounds like your father, Abe, was quite a businessman.
He was an enterprising man. but I would not call him a good businessman.
No?
He was very generous,
Oh, he gave away too
gave
much.
away whatever business he was in. He didn't look at the profit. He always looked at the idea of doing the right thing and helping people. And many hundreds of people owed him money.
Oh,
Whatever
and people
business
wouldn't
he was in.
people wouldn't do likewise with him.
He went through a series of businesses during that terrible time. He owned a wrecking yard in the late 20s after he sold the feed business, a wrecking yard for cars and trucks. That was rather successful. I don't know why he went out of that business. It may have been the cost of scrap iron and so forth went way down. He was in the wholesale fruit business
Yeah.
with two neighbors and friends from the old country. One was Charlie Gindis, who was the father of my best friend during my early years in Altoona, all through my years in Altoona. Charlie Gindis later left the partnership and became a policeman. I think he was the one and only Jewish person.
I was going to say, yeah.
And Charlie had been in the war, so he got a opportunity to become a policeman, and of course he was an ardent member of the Veterans of Foreign Wars. Another partner was somebody named Kirshner, whose son Clarence was a friend of mine, and a younger son Meyer, and a daughter Shirley. They were all younger, but friends of ours. But Clarence and I were very close, and we spent many happy hours reading stories about the aviators in World War I. Our Lone Eagle and the Red Baron, and reading magazines about those exploits, drawing airplanes, building little miniature airplanes, fighting with our miniature airplanes, air battles and sea battles. And it's funny now because both of us, Clarence was about a year younger than I was, both of us dreamed of becoming Air Force pilots, fighter pilots.
Yeah.
And when I went to join the Army, I wanted to get into the Air Force.
Is that right?
It was called, in those days, it was the Army Air Force. They examined me very thoroughly, said everything was fine until they came to a blood test.
Oh, boy.
I mean, an eye test. I had astigmatism in my right eye.
Oh.
My left eye was 20/20 or better. My right eye was 20/30, and I flunked.
Oh.
I never understood the sense of that because I could see as well as anybody.
Absolutely.
But the Army felt
I heard they were very
they
strict.
were very strict,
Well, they still are.
and they felt eyeballs were important.
Yeah, I guess
But
so.
when you're flying at 200 miles an hour, I don't think it's as important as when you're flying at 600 or 700 miles an hour.
Right.
But in those days, they had strict regulations, so I wasn't able to achieve my dream.
Right.
But a couple of years later, Clarence achieved his. He became a cadet in the Air Force and flew many missions in Korea and later in Vietnam, rose to the rank of a full colonel, and is retired and now living in the Silver Spring area of Maryland.
Sounds like you still keep in touch.
I called him once about 2 years ago. He was up on the roof fixing his roof, and when he heard I called, he climbed down. Unfortunately, he gave me the bad news that his brother Meyer, or Mike, was dead, and his sister, who used to be a neighbor of ours in East Meadow, Shirley, moved to California. Of course, I knew that. And he had a very lovely mother and father. We loved them very much. They were nice people.
Now, I want to know, did you ever help your dad in his businesses, like when you were 8 or 10, did you work for him?
Well, when I was a little kid, I don't know how old I was. I must have been around 7 or 8. I was fascinated with cars. I used to identify every car that came down 18th Street,
Yeah.
to sit on the porch and tell you exactly what model it was.
Wow.
What cylinders it had. I could recognize them from the front, from the side, or the rear.
Were there that many cars?
By that
No.
time, by 1929 or 30, there were quite a few cars, and 18th Street was really a thoroughfare with a streetcar and a couple of, I don't think we had buses in those days, but we did have a streetcar that made it into downtown Altoona. Maybe it took 10 minutes, if that much. But it was also the access route to a famous Route 30. I believe it was Route 30. I think it was called the Lincoln Highway, which went across part of the United States, if not all of it. And therefore there was plenty of traffic.
Oh, okay, my goodness.
And the Schaefer store and our home above it looked out onto that traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we moved to the other house that we were renting, we were virtually in front of 18th Street. Our porch was right on 18th Street. It was easy to do.
Yeah.
The one good thing about it, we had a lot of relatives living around. After my mother and father made them move down from Drew Hill on 15th Avenue, other relatives followed. My aunt lived on 18th Street. Several other aunts who died lived within a block or two. My favorite Aunt Jenny lived right behind us on Washington Avenue, and it was a close area of people who were basically one single family unit.
So even if your father had lost his businesses, you're saying that you and your sister Miriam never really felt that loss because you had so many family around and you never wanted for a meal?
We felt the loss when we lost our home. It was a beautiful home, and we were surrounded by a lot of land with quite a few cherry trees, large cherry trees, with plum trees, with grapevines, and lots of room to play. We had a large chicken coop in the back, and the house was very large.
Oh, because I don't remember you talking about that.
Yeah, our house was quite large. We had 2 living rooms, one that my mother kept only for the high holidays, and another one that was for ordinary days, or weekends. Of course, she kept everything spotlessly clean.
You don't even hear of homes like that
A
today.
large kitchen. I think at first she had a wood-burning stove, but later they converted it to gas. And of course we had an inexhaustible pantry in the Schaefer store. The manager of the store, Replogle, his name was Replogle, was a very nice man. And he had an assistant, a very dark-haired, good-looking woman. I think her name was Lena, but I'm not positive. And they were my playmates. I was in and out of that store all the time.
Wow.
When it wasn't busy, they would bounce me on their knee and play with me and chase me out in the woods. And it was really a joyful time for a little boy.
Oh, I bet. Sounds like it.
I had a nasty habit of sticking out my tongue sometimes at people. I must have been about 4 or 5 at the time.
Oh, really?
And I remember one day, her name wasn't Lena, it was Marie. Marie grabbed me, and Mr. Replogle got a big butcher knife.
Wow.
He said, "Sammy,
Wow.
you ever stick that tongue out again, I'm going to put it in the showcase here with the other tongue."
I guess you never stuck your tongue out.
I never stuck my tongue out again.
Well,
It's funny, I remembered her name was Marie. They
Yeah.
were wonderful people.
Now, another question I would like to ask you about Altoona is, when did you get your reputation as being #1 tough guy? Because people, I remember your, Jerry, was he your cousin?
Yes.
He took us around when we went to Altoona, and he said that he would always go to you for help if anyone made fun of him.
The problem, we were a whole bunch of cousins. I never counted them, but I would say from my father's side, I must have had at least 20 or 25 first cousins. Most of them with mothers who had died when they were very young. So the three surviving aunts, my mother and my Aunt Jenny and my Aunt Lil, raised these semi-orphans. Of course, their fathers were still alive, but during hard times, their fathers weren't very productive. Some of them did better than others, but as a whole, they suffered quite badly. And these children were raised in their aunts' homes as much as in their father's home. And in a few cases, they were almost never in their father's home. The father didn't have a home. Irving Bergstein was one. He lived in our house with my mother and father, and he had a job at the railroad yards, but he couldn't support his own home. And he had four children. The youngest, Jerry, lived with my Aunt Jenny, who had about 9 or 10 children, and one more didn't matter. And they literally raised him as one of their own. And some of Jenny's boys, I remember Aaron in particular, they all took care of him.
Oh, is that, they took him in as their own.
But they all took care of him. And later on, they took him into their business. And they always considered Jerry a brother.
Is that right?
Even when he moved out and went to live with his...
What was their last name?
Their name was Carp.
Right. I think he went into business with them, stayed with them the rest of his life, and bought the business.
Eventually. Joe Carp was the one who founded the business.
He just died.
He just died Erev Rosh Hashanah. Or the morning before Rosh Hashanah.
Okay.
And he died of cancer. Joe was the youngest of the brothers, and he started his business at my bar mitzvah.
Oh, when was that thing?
That was 1938.
Okay.
In August. The rabbi wasn't there. He went on vacation. I was taught from my mitzvah by an uncle Dave Getz, uncle who was married to one of my aunts who died and left several children, Francis and David Levine. Their father, Joe Levine, was a wonderful man, and he worked very hard as an upholsterer, and he supported that family. He also supported the daughter and a son of another sister who had died. She had been married to Dave Getz. They all lived together. When she died, her name was Lena. I think her name was Lena. When she died, it was like an epidemic in the late 20s, 28, 29, 30, 31, where I lost most of my aunts while they were still very young women.
Do you remember?
The only two who survived were my Aunt Jenny and my Aunt Lil.
Wow.
However, my Aunt Lil didn't survive very long. She died in probably 1936. Yeah, that's about right. I was 10 or 11 years old. She died of jaundice. And I loved her so much.
Yeah. That's okay.
We go to her funeral.
Oh, because you loved her so much.
I didn't want to admit she died.
Well, that happened to my Aunt Eleanor, who is in her 60s today, and she refused to go to my Grandma Costco's funeral. She couldn't, and she never forgave God for 10 years.
I never forgave myself.
Well, that happens. You know, that's a young person not understanding.
Jenny was one of my 3 mothers.
Okay.
Because of this problem my mother had, which made them decide I was a tumor.
Right.
Her menstruation was totally irregular, not working.
Yeah.
She was constantly sick.
Oh, boy.
To Philadelphia for hospital visits. And then they found she did have cancer.
Oh,
Went to Philadelphia for radiation. Radium treatments, they called it in those days.
yes.
And she was a very sickly woman for many years,
Oh, my.
and virtually the rest of her life.
Mm.
So during those absences,
Oh, I
Miriam
see.
was my mother, and my Aunt Lou was my mother.
Oh, I wanted to know who that second mother was. That was your sister. Your sister.
She was 13 years older than me,
Oh, boy.
and a very accomplished housekeeper.
Okay.
And she took care of my father and me.
All right.
I'm sorry I broke down like that.
That's okay.
Used to go up on the hill when I was a little boy. My father owned a couple of houses up there that were rented out. And then there was another house for my grandmother. My grandfather died when I was born, and therefore I was named for him.
Oh,
Just
Sam?
before I was born.
Sam?
No, his name is Joe.
Oh,
His name was Joseph.
how were you named for him?
It's very confusing to me. My name in English, of course, was given. I didn't have a name when they filled out the birth certificate.
Oh, were you known as Sonny Boy?
I was always known as Sonny.
I remember your saying that, yeah.
And my cousin Jerry, who lived with my Aunt Jenny, was known as Sonny Boy.
Mm-hmm.
Al Jolson was very popular in those days. And
Oh.
Sonny Boy. So there were two Sonny Boys. I was a couple of years older than Jerry, maybe 3. And he was the little Sonny Boy, and I was the big Sonny Boy.
Oh.
But our real names, which at that time I don't think any of us actually knew,
Oh.
my sister Miriam, I never knew her name until I was in junior high school.
Oh, boy. What did they call
name
her?
was Sis.
Oh.
Everybody called her Sis.
Oh.
My father never told her anything else, neither did everybody, relatives, everybody called her Sis.
Oh, boy.
And I was Sonny,
Yeah.
or Sonny Boy, and sometimes I would be called in Yiddish by my Yiddish name, Shlomo Zundel. Shlomo Zundel is my Yiddish name. Later on, I always thought I was named for my grandfather, whose name must have been Zundel.
Mm-hmm.
Zundel means Sonny Boy.
I see. Oh, that's why they called you Sonny Boy.
Yeah, my father's, with the grandfather I was referring to, was Zundel Kirshner, and he was, his name was known as Joe, but his name was Zundel.
Okay.
And Zundel is also in Yiddish, but not in Hebrew, translated as Joe many times.
Okay.
My cousin Shimon, the rabbi, says I'm incorrect.
Oh.
He says Zundel means Sonny, and the Jewish name and Hebrew name for Joe is Yossel.
Mm.
Now, I was never called Yossel,
Mm-hmm.
and my cousins who were also named for the same, I have 2 cousins who were named, what? I have 2 of my cousins, Jerry Getz and Jerry Bergstein, were both named for the same grandfather,
Oh.
and they were never called Joe either. They adopted the name Gerald.
Oh.
But nobody was ever sure of what the name should be.
Okay.
When I went to school, they asked me what my name was. I said Samuel. I knew that.
Yeah.
That turned out to be wrong, too.
Oh,
My
really?
Hebrew name is really translated as Solomon.
Oh, is that a
So I
fact?
didn't know any better. And when
Oh.
the teacher asked me what my English name was, I told her Samuel.
Amazing.
Because I think that's what my mother told me.
Oh, I see.
The Samuel was named after another grandfather, my mother's father, who never came to America, so I
Oh.
never met him.
Okay.
And he died in Lithuania before I was born, and she named his name, I believe, was Shlomo Meir,
Mm.
and I was named Shlomo Zundel. It's all confusing. I need my cousin.
Yeah, you need a chart. Yeah.
But anyway, I had a birth certificate where my name was spelled male, M-A-L-E.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't have the date correct, and the time, and the hospital, and the name of the doctor, and it had my mother's name Rachel and my father's name Abe, and the last name was spelled K-I-R-S-N-E-R.
Oh, they didn't have the
Their
H.
name. Not me, huh?
They didn't have the H.
No. That was the way my father always wrote his name.
Okay.
And then I heard later on that Miriam was told by a teacher that it was wrong. She should put an H in it.
Oh, that's how you got the H.
My mother and father always did it without an H until my mother went for her citizenship papers,
Mm-hmm.
and Miriam convinced her she should spell it with an H.
Okay.
That was probably the proudest day of my mother's life.
Oh, to get to become an immigrant, yeah.
Even become a citizen.
Oh.
Even prouder than the day I was born.
Oh. I'm sure she had to really study for that. Who helped her? Who helped her study for it?
Miriam and I, we said.
Oh, really? Wow. I'm sure she knows more about the country than I do.
She knew the Constitution.
I bet she
the
did.
Constitution of the United States better than Professor Starr, who's been
Right.
grilling Clinton. And
Exactly.
the other travesty of justice.
Exactly.
In those days, you had to be able to read English, know parts of the Constitution, answer questions.
Wow.
You didn't become a citizen just because you could walk.
Right.
And you could not vote unless you could read and write.
Is that right?
That's correct.
Goodness.
There was no compensation for being able to read in Hebrew or Yiddish.
Do you happen to know what year that was? That.
I don't know exactly, but it was in the mid 30s.
Oh.
Maybe it was before World War II, so it had to be in the mid to late 30s.
Okay. So you were a very young man helping.
I was 13 at the age of 1938. I
Yeah.
was 13 at the age of 13.
Yeah.
Anyway, that complication of my birth certificate caused me a lot of grief. Because when I entered the Army in 1943,
Mm-hmm.
I volunteered before I was 18. I was called just after my 18th birthday.
Oh, boy.
And I volunteered for the Army Specialized Training Program, which was a form of officers' candidacy, given at Fort Benning, Georgia, at the officers' candidacy. And it wasn't just like an ordinary soldier going into the Army. You were allegedly going to be an officer within a few years, and they required all sorts of documentation. One of them is a birth certificate. Of course, I presented this birth certificate, and they laughed.
Oh.
So I had to get an affidavit from my Aunt Lil. My Aunt Jenny was dead by that time.
Yeah.
And my Uncle Harry, and I had to get one from my teachers that I was the one and same person who was represented in that birth certificate. And I got those affidavits, and they allowed me into the Army.
Oh,
Of course, they would have taken me in the Army anyway, but
Oh,
not in the ASCP.
Right.
Then another time that birth certificate came a cropper was when I graduated from law school and applied for admission to the New York bar. They required a birth certificate. They wouldn't accept an affidavit of my now departed aunt. No, she wasn't departed. She was still alive. But they wouldn't accept the affidavit of her. It had to be a family Bible with recordings in it, which we didn't have.
Okay.
It had to be a birth certificate for my parents. It was a very complicated thing. So I chose to go to Harrisburg, the capital of Pennsylvania, because first I went to Hollidaysburg, the capital of Blair County, and no birth certificate for me existed. The courthouse or record room had burned down, and all the birth certificates were destroyed.
Wow.
This was in the day before computers.
Okay.
But they did have duplicate records, it was very foresighted of them, in the state capitol in Harrisburg. At least they claimed that they did.
Right.
And they acknowledged that this old birth certificate of mine was a legitimate birth certificate.
Mm-hmm.
But they would not change the name unless I brought them more affidavits. So I spent 2 or 3 days there
Oh, my.
pleading, and finally they did accept my aunt and my uncle's affidavit, my mother and father's affidavit. I was learning a little bit about law at the same time.
Right.
And they gave me a new birth certificate.
Oh, boy.
My official name, Samuel Joseph Kirshner,
Oh.
and the Kirshner spelled Kirshner.
Oh, okay.
And that is how I was admitted to the bar under that name.
Oh, goodness.
I later regretted that I could have picked a much nicer name.
Oh. Oh, I like that
I
name.
always liked the name Paul. I could
Oh.
have become, Paul. Instead of Solomon, I could
Right.
easily justify Paul.
Right.
And as far as Kirshner, I could have been Carson,
Right.
like the movie actor.
Oh, well.
I could have been Keller. I could have picked a nice name.
Well, Kirshner is a very strong name. I like that. I like that name.
But you asked me before, how did I become known as the 18th Street Gay?
Right. I want to know that because Jerry said he depended on you to protect him.
Well, I was very protective of my young cousins. My young cousins consisted of several girls who really didn't need much protection, so I didn't bother much with them, although I loved them and we were friends. It was Bibby, whose name I never knew till she got married under
Oh.
the name, which I thought was a phony one, of Lillian.
Oh.
I always knew her as Bibby.
Uh-huh.
Her older sister, Peppy, her older sister, Ann, and of course the youngest brother, Jerry, he was the youngest. I think Jerry was the youngest.
Yeah, you said he was. Jerry Bernstein.
Yeah.
You said he was the youngest, yeah.
I think he was younger than Bibby. They were all very dear to me and still are. Bibby died a year or 2 ago, and Jerry, thank God, is still well and just left Altoona to move to Florida.
He did move?
Yeah.
Oh,
This week.
I didn't realize that.
They bought an apartment in Florida, and they're now down there.
My goodness.
My cousin Jerry Getz, who was about Jerry Bergstein's age, and my Aunt Lil's son. And there was Howard Miller was another cousin, and also a year or 2 younger. And of course there was my friend Kyan Skalitzky. And they were frequently in order to go to school, they had to travel through a couple of bad neighborhoods.
Oh, okay.
Now, we didn't have any Harlem, and we had no problem with the blacks in Altoona. We didn't call them blacks, we called them friends.
Oh,
We called them by their name.
okay.
One of my dearest friend and a neighbor was Reardon Sullivan. I never even thought of him as being black.
Mm-hmm.
It was only that we had a black church, a Negro church, next door to us, on the other side of our plum trees. And they were very nice people. They had church service every Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
I think the building now is a bar, if I'm not mistaken, or a club or something. But it was a very nice little church. And a next door neighbor of ours was, now I know, I thought she was a white woman my whole life. I didn't know any difference. Now I'm told she was a mulatto.
Oh.
And I was always in her house.
Oh, really?
Always playing with. She didn't have any children of her own.
Okay.
She took care of me when my mother was gone.
Oh.
Never for money.
Sounds like you had a lot of care in that community.
Yeah, it was a caring community. Even people, we had, in addition to the relatives, blood relatives, enumerated quite a few. My mother had, and my father, had people who were called landslides. A landsman is a compatriot from the same part of Europe that you came from, the same town or shtetl or city. And my mother had a number of neighbors who knew her from the old days in Lithuania. She came to America when she was 17 years old. But it's amazing, these people retained their images of each other for years.
Oh.
And they remained friends all their lives. My
Okay.
father also had some landslides. And
Yeah.
my father had 3 well-off aunts who in effect brought us to America. Brought, not us, them. Brought him and his sister. My father was about 8 or 9 years old when he came to America.
Oh, wow.
So they brought him and my Aunt Jenny and all the other brothers, and I think there were 9 or 10 of them at the time,
Mm-hmm.
mostly girls. There were 2 boys, Uncle Harry and my father, Abe. And Harry was much older than my father, by at least 10 or more years. He had gone to live in England and saved up money as a peddler, and he worked very hard, saved up money to pay his passage to America
Mm-hmm.
and contribute toward the passage of the rest of the family. But my father's 3 aunts, one of them was named Hassa Berman. She married a man named Jacob Berman, who had a wholesale dry goods business,
Okay.
a very big one, Jacob Berman Company. And he was very successful and a very good man, and he helped. Another aunt was married to another Jacob. This one was Jake Lenson. He was one of the richest men in Altoona, also in the dry goods business. And then he owned overall factories, and he had other businesses. He was married to one of my great aunts. And the third one, let's see, Jake Berman. Jake Lenson. There was one more. I can't remember that one now.
Mm-hmm.
Hassa Berman. Lenson. The third aunt will come to me.
Yeah. Okay.
Great aunt, I should say.
Mm.
I can't think who she was right now. But
Okay.
she was also rather well off.
All right.
And my mother also had a rabbi who was a relative, a first cousin. He was Rabbi Henderson. Her family name was Baron, B-A-R-O-N. In Europe it was pronounced Baron.
Mm-hmm.
She was very proud of that family. It came
Oh,
from
really?
a long line of very well-educated rabbis and scholars.
Was that the Cohen line?
No.
What line is that called?
They were from the line of the Cohens. My mother was, first Hebrew word I learned was, well, I don't know if it was Hebrew or Yiddish. She was a Bas Gehenna and very proud of it.
What does that mean?
She was descended from the Cohens,
Oh,
high priests.
okay.
And they are the people who conduct certain ceremonies during great holidays like Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah.
Okay.
And they're reputed to have nasty tempers.
Oh.
And my
Oh,
mother
really?
had one. Had a very forgiving temper. My mother would blow off steam if somebody did something that she disapproved of
Uh-huh.
or insulted somebody or anything.
Right.
And then she would never hold grudges.
Now that you know your,
She would say laughingly, after all, I'm a Bas Gehenna.
well, you know your daughter Karen inherited that
My
from
daughter
her.
was very, very much like that.
She blows up and then she forgives immediately. So that's
I
legitimate.
think my mother forgave a little faster than Karen.
Oh, okay.
But maybe not much. So Rabbi Henderson was close. He was very poor, and I know he had lost his wife, and he had one son whom I've lost track of. He was a scholarly man. He was very, very orthodox, and my mother and father helped him a great deal, as much as he lived in a broken down old house in an alley near the synagogue, and he worked in the synagogue. Actually, my family, my mother's family primarily, helped found 2 synagogues and 1 temple.
Oh, is that a fact?
The original synagogue was I think it was what they called the little shul.
Oh,
It was a little bigger than the colored church that was next door to us, and it was about 2 blocks closer to Midtown, Altoona. It can be called Midtown. And it was on 18th Street. And it was very orthodox.
oh,
And I believe it was founded around the time that the original synagogue up on 14th or 13th Avenue.
Yeah, Jerry took
Still
us.
there.
Jerry took us to that.
Before they built the Jewish Center and all the, it was an Orthodox synagogue.
Okay.
When a rabbi named Goldberger came to town, and he prevailed upon my mother's relatives, the Hendersons and the Lensons, to convert from Orthodox to conservative and allow the women to sit in the same auditorium instead of up in the
Rafters.
behind curtains. That took a lot of bloodletting.
I bet.
And a couple of my relatives, including my mother's cousin, Rabbi Henderson, and a few others, a couple of my uncles, I think Dave Getz and a few others, I'm not sure anymore of all that. I was a little boy and I really didn't pay a lot of attention to that. But I knew there was a big battle and they built a little synagogue, which was strictly Orthodox.
Okay.
No women sitting with men, that was considered sacrilegious.
I see.
And
I'm sure it still is in the Orthodox.
it is.
You're right.
Then other very rich relatives who lived in a fancy part of town called Columbia Park, which is now not so fancy as it was. In those days it was elegant. They built a magnificent Jewish temple, a Reform temple. And my mother never forgave me
Oh, really?
because they put so much money into that, and the rabbi didn't keep kosher. They didn't daven with tefillin. They turned Hebrew books of prayer go from the right to the left. They followed the American style of left to right. They did everything. We went to a few services there. They had a choir singing. They weren't even Jewish. They used to hire non-Jewish people to sing in the choir. And the rabbi ate ham and lived at the Penalto Hotel. She couldn't forgive that.
That's unbelievable.
My mother,
I'm even shocked
my
myself.
mother was strictly Orthodox.
Well, that's what I was getting
She
ready to...
didn't mind being in the balcony. But she didn't leave the synagogue when they allowed women downstairs. Rabbi Goldberger did it very cleverly. He didn't introduce women downstairs in the main auditorium. It was a beautiful auditorium. It still is a beautiful synagogue. He didn't introduce them originally at any of the normal services. What he did was start a Friday night service at 8 o'clock, long after Mincha and Myrav had been done by the Orthodox.
Okay.
And at that special service, which Dave Ginders and I and other kids in the Hebrew school attended religiously, attendance was taken.
Oh, yeah.
Our reward, Dave had a beautiful singing voice. And I was standing behind him, and the rabbi would give us each a little glass of wine, of the wine, and Dave would sing the bracha for wine.
Is that a prayer?
It's a prayer. It's a prayer that said, thanking God for the fruit of the vine.
Okay.
And Dave had a nice way of singing that. So rather than make me angry by giving the wine to Dave, he gave it to both of us.
Okay.
He was nice about it.
Yeah.
That was before he found out I was a gangster. Rabbi Goldberger and I had I guess it was in the time I was originally taught by my relative, Rabbi Henderson, and by another rabbi that they brought in. And then Rabbi Goldberger became the chief rabbi, the only rabbi, threw the others out, and started a more modern type of Hebrew school. But boy, he could rap you with his steel ruler across the knuckles.
I
He
bet.
could pull your ear out. Vicious. The other rabbis did things like that,
Right.
but never as well as Rabbi Goldberger. He was a very handsome man with a very beautiful wife, although chubby,
Yeah.
beautiful wife, and a very, very beautiful daughter and a very handsome son, Danny. Danny was about a half a year or a year older than me, and we became not close friends, but friends. But I really didn't like his father.
Yes.
He was, first of all,
He was too brutal.
He was a ladies' man.
Even if he was married?
He was a ladies' man.
Wow.
Now, you know, I didn't know much about it, and I'm giving you hearsay, which I'm not
Right.
going to repeat. But the women loved him.
Goodness.
He spoke well, he was well educated, he was, I think he must have been American born, he was educated in a yeshiva, and he had modern training as well as ancient training,
Wow.
and he knew how to put a speech together.
A real charmer.
Charmer and a mesmerizer.
Uh-huh.
I think he was one of the best public speakers I've ever heard.
Hmm?
And I really often patterned myself after him
Oh,
when I had to make speeches.
goodness.
He was brilliant. His son Danny became a rabbi, and Sonia, the daughter, married a rabbi. As I understand, Sonia is an Orthodox rabbi, is married to an Orthodox rabbi. Danny became either conservative or reformed in Denver. I don't know I've had a couple of contacts with him on the phone, and I understand he later on resigned and did not want to be a rabbi anymore, but I don't know that for a fact.
Okay.
Boy, I'm getting all over the place here.
No, it's fine.
You asked how did I become known as so tough. It was mostly protecting my cousins.
All right.
I would escort them through the woods to school. I would escort them to downtown. The gangs that preyed on us were not blacks.
Right.
They were mostly Polish.
Is that right?
There's a lot of anti-Semitism.
I didn't know you had Polish people in Altoona.
Quite a few. Some of them were my mother and father's close friends, but they couldn't control their children or,
Right.
or their neighbors.
Right.
And there always has been very substantial anti-Semitism between Poles and Russians and Ukrainians
Yeah, that's...
and a few Germans. Now, we had a few German neighbors, but as far as I know, they were never anti-Semitic. They were very close friends of my mother and father, and were always there playing cards with them and eating with them, and very, very many things.
Well, now, would you say that that was kind of like
That was how it started.
Okay.
But fortunately, I was big for my age.
It sounds like you must.
Unfortunately, I shot my growth by the time I was 13 and didn't grow much after.
Now, how tall was that?
By the time I was 13, I was probably at least 5'8".
That's really tall.
And I was well built, even though I ate nothing.
Right.
Nobody could understand how I could have a body like that.
It's amazing because your father was rather slight.
My father was slight, but my mother's relatives were always big
Okay.
and very muscular.
Okay.
Only from the pictures.
Okay.
Anyway, I had good muscles.
Yeah.
I was very active in sports, in football, and baseball, and basketball.
Yeah.
And I could run like the wind.
Wow.
There was only one person in all of Altoona sports who could run faster than me.
You probably remember his
That
name.
was a black boy named Rabbit Ward.
Wow.
His name was Rabbit for a good reason.
Right.
He ran like a rabbit.
I guess.
And he and I had many, many races.
Is that right?
Many races. I never beat him. He always beat me by 1 or 2 steps.
My goodness.
But between us, he needed me to chase him.
Oh. Keep in practice.
Yeah, and even in practice, because, you know.
Right. Because he had no competition otherwise.
You run by yourself, and you don't break any records.
Exactly.
Rabbit Ward was something special. He could run like the wind.
Well,
I don't know what happened to him.
Well, on that note of athleticism, I'd like you to tell us just a little bit about that football short career you had in Altoona, because I understand Altoona has the best football team, if not just in the East Coast, maybe in the whole state. I don't know how it is today.
Well,
Was Rabbit on there with you?
yes, I believe he was. It's a long time ago. I remember I had 2 football careers, actually 3.
Okay.
The third one was the shortest of all.
Yeah.
The first one was from the time I could sneak away from my mother, or she was in Philadelphia visiting doctors.
She didn't want you to
She
play?
didn't want me to play football. No, she was mother wouldn't say that. However, I had a neighbor who was a star football player.
Right.
his last name was Pat. He was a terrific football player in
Right.
Altoona. And one of my closest friends, Sidney Marin, we call him Marine, I think they now pronounce him name Marin. Sidney Marin's brother Sam, who was probably only about 5'3" or 5'4", was a star quarterback for the Altoona high school team. So, and my next door neighbor, who wasn't Jewish, his name was George, he taught me how to play football.
Oh, is that right? Oh.
He was a tackle. I didn't want to be a tackle. I didn't want to be a center. I wanted to be a running back.
Okay.
And I was fast
Right.
and quick,
Right.
and apparently because of my thighs and powerful bow legs,
Yeah.
I was very hard to bring down.
I was wondering if...
By the time I was probably 8 or 9, about the time I was 9 years old, I started playing sandlot football.
Okay.
And when I say sandlot, there wasn't a blade of grass on that sandlot.
No.
It was nothing but yellowish dirt and rocks and stones.
That's very hard to
Very
play.
dangerous and very hard. But we loved it. And we didn't have
Would you tackle?
Oh, of course. No touch for us. We didn't even know about touch.
Did you get hurt with the rocks and...
Many times. We all got hurt. That's so good.
But you didn't feel them, I guess.
But my mother used to embarrass me when she found out about this.
Yeah.
She would come to call me away, and when I wouldn't come, she would come back with a glass of milk and a
Oh,
banana.
no.
It was very embarrassing.
Well, it's a good thing you were a tough guy, because...
Of course, we were playing among friends. It was,
Right.
Then, when I went to junior high school, and I went out for the football team and the basketball team. I didn't do too well in basketball.
No?
Somehow I remember I was one of the two tallest in my class. The other guy was named Gross, who was not Jewish, and he was in my class,
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't want to be center,
Oh.
and he was taller than I was. So the coach, who was a short, pudgy man, called me over and says, "You're the center."
Mm.
Well, I wasn't a very good center. First of all, every center I played against
Was
was
tall.
a head or an arm taller than me.
Right.
So I didn't win very many jumps
Right.
until the coach taught me what to do. He says, "Sammy, you got it all wrong.
Right.
You don't, a guy like you, I was center, believe it or not. But I never jumped for the ball.
Yeah.
I would aim my head at the other center's chin.
That's fine. That's...
So I absolutely tried a couple of times, but I never had the nerve to do it.
Well, you could knock somebody out like
Oh,
that.
and you could hurt your head.
Right.
So our games used to be scores like 12-9, 13-13. I mean, very low.
So that was either terrific defense or people couldn't put it through the hoop.
Terrible
What was
shot
it?
making.
Oh, okay.
And learning how to dribble. Learning how to dribble. I wasn't very good at that either, but I
Yeah.
managed.
Yeah.
But we had a guy named Autry and Gross, a couple of others. The names will come to me. They were terrific guys.
So if you
Then I went out for the football,
yeah, that was your thing.
and that was my thing, and I loved it. Now in those days, I was a good kicker as well as
A running
a
back.
runner, and I used to kick, not place kicks so much, but drop kicks.
Oh,
You never see
punt.
them. You haven't seen in the last 50 years in football.
Is that called punting? Is that something different?
Well, it was actually similar to punting. In punting, you drop the kick, you drop the ball on your foot. Your foot kicks the ball before it touches the ground.
Okay.
In drop kicking, you pull the ball into your body like you're going to run,
Okay.
start a run, and then suddenly stop, throw the ball down on the ground, let it bounce up, and kick it after it's bounced up.
I didn't think that was possible.
It was legal,
With a
possible,
pigskin.
and you always caught them by surprise.
I guess.
You usually do this not on fourth down, because they would expect it
Right.
on fourth down, but on third down.
Oh.
You had like 12 yards to go, although that didn't happen too often, because with me as the running back, I usually
Okay.
made the yardage.
Right.
I mean, if we needed the 10 yards, I got the 10 yards.
Amazing.
Even if I carried force 4 guys on my back.
Amazing.
Then my third career in football was when I moved to New York at the age of 15 and a half, and I was enrolled in the largest high school in the world, James Monroe High School, which had at that time about 12,000 students, most of them in the main building, but they had several annexes. And I went out for the football team, and it was coached by Doc Weedman, who was famous throughout New York City, PSAL, Public School Athletic League.
Mm-hmm.
Monroe was very famous for its basketball team. I didn't go out for that because I knew I'd never get near it.
Yeah.
And we did have a great basketball team. And they also were great in soccer, in fencing, and in baseball. Hank Greenberg came from Monroe.
Is that right?
Yes.
Did he play for Detroit?
Later on.
Okay.
He graduated Monroe somewhere in the mid-30s, about 36. And they had one famous football player, whose name I can't remember. It began with an H. It was either Hawthorne or Hathaway or something. Other than that, there's not much in the way of football. But a number of Polish football players who were pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a good team.
Mm-hmm.
But Doc Weedman was the worst coach I ever came across.
Is that right?
He did not believe in a kick of any kind, except a punt. He would not let me drop kick.
No razzle-dazzle.
Would not let me place kick for the extra point. Every extra point we tried, when I or anybody else scored a touchdown, always a running play, and we frequently didn't make it because...
Was that 2 points in those days?
In those days, it was 1 point. Either way, you got 1 point.
Okay.
He wasn't doing it for the extra point.
Okay.
In those days, it was 1 point.
All right.
But he didn't trust kicking, even though I was very good at it.
He sounds like he's a bore.
Now, I was not the kind of kicker they have now with their bare feet or side of the foot. I was
The
the
toe.
old Pat Summerall type.
Right.
On the toes.
Right.
And I would always have a favorite guy of mine, Steve Latch, or Phil Latch. He later became an All-American. He would hold the ball, and I would kick in practice. He'd never let me kick one in a game. Would never let us throw a forward pass or try any kind of razzle-dazzle. Like even the old Pop Warner made it famous, the old Statue of Liberty, where you go back to throw a pass and a back runs around, snaps up. We used to try this in practice when he wasn't looking.
Yeah, but
He would go crazy. He wouldn't let us pass it. He wouldn't let us do it. I got mixed up. Steve Latch or Joe Latch was the one I used in Altoona. He was held the ball. And in New York, I never had anybody hold on a regular
that
basis.
must have been very frustrating.
Very frustrating. So after the season, we only played a few games. I mean, this was in when did we move to New York? 1940.
Mm-hmm.
We only played a few games, maybe 5 or 6 games.
Yeah.
Total. There was hardly anybody ever in the stands.
So you mean it wasn't big in New York, football?
Baseball was big.
In
Basketball.
Pennsylvania, football was a thing.
So here goes the cute part of the long story. Sometime since I was out for the football team, they transferred me to the main building so I could make practice, which was a lucky break because the annex was 4 or 5 miles away and difficult to get to, and I could never get to any extracurricular activities.
Goodness.
So, because I went to the main building, one of my English teachers had a class in journalism. His name was Samuel LaBelle. And I was always interested in journalism. I started publishing my own little newspapers before I was 10 years old.
Oh, really?
Setting the rubber type by hand.
Oh, that's amazing.
Later on using a typewriter and a hex.
I didn't know you were so interested in that.
I had a couple of newspapers. Little weekly.
Right.
Kid stuff, but it was fun. I never gave that up. That it was really my constant ambition.
Is that right?
But anyway, I joined the journalism class and wrote a few stories that, the assignments he'd given it to us.
Right.
And he said, his name was Samuel also. So he
Mhm.
used to call me Samuel,
Uh-huh.
something like that.
Yeah.
Funny way. A very nice, red-headed man whose nephew later became very famous in politics
Oh.
and wrote an article about Monroe being the largest high school in the world. That was a number of years later. Anyway, he assigned me some things to write, and then he put me on the Monroe Mirror on the
Mhm.
staff as a reporter.
So that was a pretty influential paper.
It was, we sold every issue.
I bet.
Free. It was part of,
Oh.
it was part of the GO. You had to be a GO member,
Oh, okay.
and I think almost everybody was. I never met somebody who wasn't.
Okay.
It gave you certain benefits. One of them was the Monroe Mirror. And we probably put out an issue once a month, occasionally a special issue. And it was a full-size newspaper, usually 4 pages, sometimes 6. And the first year, I was a reporter and assistant sports editor.
Okay.
The second year, I was promoted to managing editor and feature editor. First feature editor, then managing editor. And then the third year, I was editor-in-chief.
That's a pretty quick climb.
Very fast. 'Cause
And
I was this is no joke. Anybody who was on the staff will tell you, and I still have some friends that I'm
Right.
in contact with, nobody ever worked harder than I did.
is that right? So you demanded perfection from yourself? Yeah.
When it came time for the next football season,
Right.
in
41.
1941 probably, yeah, 41, I resigned from the team,
Really?
and I decided to take the job of managing editor. I was also sports editor.
Right.
But then later that year, being managing editor was too much, and I caused too much controversy, so I appointed a friend of mine, Harry Bender, as sports editor. Sports editor before Harry had been a friend of mine named Fisher. I can't remember his last name, but it wasn't Carey. His first name, I mean. I can't remember. Eddie Fisher.
Yeah.
But the wrong Eddie Fisher.
Okay. Not the one associated with Liz.
No, I think the real Eddie Fisher came from Philadelphia.
Okay.
This Eddie Fisher was a terrific guy and a good writer and a good sports editor, but he never wanted to do anything else. He just wrote about sports. Anyway, one day it occurred that Eddie couldn't get his column done. So I hurried up and wrote a column under my byline, covered the whole length of the paper,
Mhm.
and it was about 2 columns wide, 2 or 3 columns wide, comparing my experiences with New York football and the experiences with football as played in Altoona.
It already sounds like a hot item.
Right. And the crux of the story was, they don't play football
Right.
in New York.
Right.
They play basketball.
Right. Baseball.
And Altoona could never play them in basketball,
Right.
and probably not even in baseball.
Right.
And certainly we didn't even know what soccer was, so we couldn't play them in that.
Mhm.
And we couldn't handle them in fencing,
Right.
but given the opportunity,
Yeah.
we could whoop them in football, and
Sure.
they wouldn't know what hit them.
So you wrote that?
I wrote all that.
That was a lot of nerve.
I said, as I see it, after my brief experience of watching and being with the Monroe team,
Yeah.
and Monroe was one of the better ones around, I said, Altoona's team would play them and the score would be a minimum of 72-0. I said,
Goodness.
of course, if the same thing went on with the basketball team, would be reversed.
Right. So you were very fair in that.
Well, and I criticized Doc Weidman and his coaches. Don't know how to call a forward pass.
Oh,
They
boy.
don't know how to kick a point.
You got all your frustrations
They don't
out.
know how to do an end around.
Right.
All they do is line bucks and line bucks. It didn't make any odds that way. I gave it to him good.
Right.
And I was a pretty good writer. Next thing I know, I'm called down to the principal. We had a nasty dean. He was a nasty man. I can't think of his name. And he started cursing me out in a non-scholarly fashion.
Right.
And Dr. Henry Hine, who I always suspected to be a Nazi plant in America,
Uh-huh.
but he may have even been Jewish for all
Right.
I don't know. He was the principal, and they're berating me. At that time, I was not the editor-in-chief was a young woman named Miriam Pfeiffer.
Mm.
We called her Mimi Pfeiffer. Her younger brother has since become world famous, Jules Pfeiffer.
Oh, is that right?
Playwright, a songwriter,
Wow.
screenwriter, cartoonist,
Amazing.
philosopher, and children's book writer, and political cartoon.
Uh-huh.
So Miriam was called down, and Sam Lubell was called down, Mr. Lubell, he wasn't a doctor, and confronted by Henry Hine, the doctor, and his
Assistant.
strong man, the dean, who meted out all the punishment. And every coach that Monroe had, the baseball coach,
Yeah.
the soccer coach, the swimming coach,
Right.
the fencing coach,
Right.
the girls coach,
Right.
every one of them was there, 7 or 8 of them lined up. I remember a few of the names. The basketball coach was named Dixteen,
Right.
Irwin Dixteen. He wasn't angry because I said nice things about his basketball.
Right.
Matty Chambers wasn't
The
angry.
baseball.
I always put his name in the paper.
Right.
He was the swimming coach.
Oh, okay.
He loved me because I would put his jokes in the paper always. The dean,
Right.
and by Doc Wheatman, who was the football coach, and 1 or 2 of the other coaches. And there was a coach who wasn't in charge of any teams, but he was in charge of the gymnasium for gymnasts and so forth. And he had several of his gym captains there. All of them were big bully types. But
Was that done to scare you?
yeah, I think so. It was intimidating. And then, fortunately, Mr. Sam Lubell really wasn't much of a defensive person. He kept kind of quiet. And my
That must have disappointed you.
It was. My editor-in-chief, whose name was, I said, Mimi Pfeiffer, she was considered a left-winger in the school.
Okay.
And she was very outspoken and attractive, tall girl, I remember, very bright. She was a couple of years older than me. And she came to my defense invoking the Constitution of the United States and freedom of speech.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget this. I think it was Dr. Hine. Freedom of speech?
Oh.
There's no freedom of speech in a school newspaper.
Uh-oh.
You do what we allow you to do.
Oh, boy.
Then Mr. I keep calling him Doctor, Mr. Lubell did speak. Well, Dr. Hine, I really think the students should have a right to air their... No, they have no such right. You have, this kid has insulted our football coach, and I said, I never insulted the players, only the coach.
Right.
And I didn't mean it as an insult. I was pointing it out, that there is a vast difference between the way football is played here in the Bronx and how football is played in the areas like Altoona and Ohio and
Yes, yes.
where football is taken very seriously.
Right.
And I said, I stated the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And how could you fault me for stating the truth? And then Mimi got involved and started yelling at them.
Thank God you had somebody on your
One
side.
coach spoke up in my behalf. That was Matty Chambers.
The swimming coach? Because you always spoke well of him.
I never had to go in the swimming pool, and I always got A's.
Oh, wow.
Never had a problem with Matty.
That's wonderful.
But anyway.
Some of the benefits of being the editor.
Nothing happened. They threatened I should write a retraction, and they threatened to, have me taken off the staff.
Yeah.
But I guess after a while, cooler heads prevailed, and nothing ever happened. Of course, I never went near the gym after.
Oh, I bet.
And that was why I never went to swimming pool.
Oh,
And Matty Chambers protected me.
okay.
Unfortunately, I had a couple of gym captains who were my buddies.
Great.
And they were protecting me. Because, the word was out to get me for what I had done.
I, they didn't take that article
They didn't
lightly.
take it lightly, but nothing happened. Now, many years later, it's an amazing turn of events. Altoona never played a New York school,
Mm-hmm.
and New York school never played any school outside of New York.
Right.
But about the time when the World Telegram and Sun was being published in New York, and we had 7 or 8 newspapers, and that was one of the 3 big ones. Well, I think it was called the World Telegram. Originally, then became combined with, I don't remember, I think it was the World Telegram. Had a terrific sports day. And one fall afternoon, I'm reading the World Telegram, and it's a full-length story across the top. I used to read all these newspapers.
Yeah.
Full-length story about Boys High of Brooklyn loses to Altoona 72-0.
That's the score you predicted.
Boys High of Brooklyn was the powerhouse school of all the PSAL. They would whip Monroe with their hands tied behind.
You're kidding.
They were good. And they were powerful. They had a good coach. They were a powerful team.
Wow.
Listen to this. Altoona had 70,000 people. I think we had that many in 2 blocks of the Bronx.
Mm.
And certainly 1 or 2 blocks of Brooklyn. They went to Altoona because Altoona was not the champion that year, but had come in 2nd or 3rd in Pennsylvania State football. And they were invited to come to Altoona to play football.
Okay.
They played on a Friday night. There were 25 or 30,000 people in the stand.
That big a crowd?
Altoona took football seriously.
Oh.
They were lighted, you know, with a lit. Didn't have anything like that here. If you got 500 here at a football game.
Right.
So Boys High, then the writer said this was amazing. What happened? You're the champion of the PSAL. So the Boys High coach said, quote, I don't know what happened. I've never seen high school, it was using my words.
Right.
I've never seen high school football played like this before. Now this was before the days of Brown, who
Yeah.
became the coach of the
Paul
Cleveland
Brown.
Paul Brown.
Founder of the Cleveland Browns.
Came from, he never was a college coach, I don't believe. He taught a high school team in Messina, Ohio, and they were always top champions.
Okay.
And he went on to the pros.
Yeah, he founded Cleveland Browns.
So he said, I don't know what happened. I never saw college football play like this before.
Mm-hmm.
Never had this many people watching us. He said it was scary.
Yeah, I was thinking it was
So
intimidating.
the coach, the Altoona coach, who was talking to the reporter too, at the same time, he doesn't know what happened, but I'll tell you what happened. He said, I had to play my 3rd and 4th stringers almost the whole game to hold the score down to 72-0. He said, my first stringers were only in there 5 or 6 minutes.
Unbelievable.
And the reason is, it's not that they're a bad football team. He says we take our football seriously.
Okay.
We have a varsity and a junior varsity,
Mhm.
each with 3 teams. We have one junior high school, the one I went to, Keith, that has a varsity and a junior varsity,
Right.
each with 2 or 3 teams. We have the Catholic junior high school, they go to the Catholic high school. We can't even touch them because they go to the Altoona Catholic high school.
Mm.
But, you know,
Yeah.
there are a few Catholics who play for us, but
Right.
they don't come up out of it. But he says, these are professional coaches. We train them all the way. We have,
Unbelievable.
when we have a game on a Friday night, when I lived there, it was on a
Mhm.
Saturday afternoon.
Okay.
The town used to shut down. Everybody went to the football game. Even my cousins who owned stores closed their stores and they went to the football game.
That's amazing.
You would call up on a phone to talk to somebody, and suddenly the operator would break in and says, "Do you know what the score is in the football game?"
Wow.
You know?
That's
That's how
amazing.
they took foot. And when
Amazing.
you played a rival like Johnstown or Harrisburg, blood was on the line.
Wow.
I mean, fights would be on the train.
I was going to say, did you have riots?
Not riots, but fights on the trains.
Oh,
back
okay.
and forth. Sometimes there was a little bit of boisterousness in the downtown area where a window would get broken or something would happen. But nothing terrible.
Yeah.
Except on the trains.
Yeah.
So he says, we take football seriously.
Mm.
We play it as it should be played in
Right.
college and in the pros.
Right.
So anyway,
I want to
was
know.
justified.
Yes, I want to
So-
know. Did you save that article?
I can't find it. I know I saved it. I looked
And
for it.
and the next question is, did you ever go back with that article to James Monroe and look up any of those?
Something close
Look
to
up that deed.
I lost my nerve. I lost my nerve. A few years after that article, my son, Mark,
Yeah.
was a little boy about 4 or 5 years old, and he went to his first ever day camp
Mm-hmm.
up in the, not in the Catskills, up near Massachusetts, at a very well-known resort, Green Acres, I believe it's called. Betty and I had a cabin, and Mark stayed with us in the cabin, and then they would comfort him early in the morning before breakfast and take him with the kids to
Mm-hmm.
breakfast, and we never saw him all day long,
Right.
except when they brought him back after dinner. Betty and I are sitting on our little porch in front of his cabin, and my son, little son Mark, is walking down the path toward here, holding on to the hand of a gnarled, bow-legged
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
I said to Betty, I know that guy.
Okay.
He was the head counselor. It was Doc Weedman,
Oh.
the football coach at Monroe, who later on went to even greater success at Clinton High School.
Is that right?
We became the champion of the Bronx once.
Wow.
He always claimed he didn't have the right material in it.
Oh, yeah, right.
12,000 was not enough.
Right.
Anyway, so I was tempted to go up to him and say, oh, hey, Doc Weedman.
Right.
I didn't tell him who I was, but I was afraid he would be nasty to me.
Oh,
I kept quiet,
oh.
never confronted him.
Well, that's
But he did look at me rather like he was
maybe,
trying to recollect who I might
he
be.
may have later.
I don't know. I never heard
That was probably a wise choice with your
I
son.
didn't want to hurt him.
No, with your son being there.
But I
No,
didn't want to hurt him either.
exactly.
And
It would have felt good.
now, it would have felt good. Now, funny thing, the starter and manager of the lobby of our building here in Garden City,
Mm-hmm.
when we were in business in Garden City, in a modern building they could afford a starter, and he went to Boys High of Brooklyn.
Oh,
So I was talking to him. He was a few years younger than me. So he was there about the time of Altoona beating Boys High of Brooklyn 72-0. I
wow.
don't remember the exact date.
Right.
It was in that area. And I asked him, when I found out he went to Boys High in Brooklyn,
You asked him about that game?
I asked him, I said, do you remember Boys
72
High
to
in
nothing.
Altoona? He says, well, I remember.
Yeah.
Nobody at Boys High will ever forget.
Right.
It was a disaster.
Total humiliation. I want
I used
to,
to kid him about it all the time.
I love it. I want to ask one more thing.
Yeah.
Now, tell me the truth. Had you been able to continue in Altoona and play out your whole football career there, do you really believe you could have gotten a football scholarship? You think you were that good?
I believe I could have gotten a football scholarship if
That's pretty
I
amazing.
wasn't injured.
That's pretty amazing.
I had all the skills. I wasn't a good passer. I was an adequate passer. I was a good kicker. I wasn't a great punter, but I could punt. But my main forte was running and
Right.
catching passes.
Okay. Now, where would you have liked to have gotten a scholarship? I'm just curious.
Well,
Do you ever think about it?
my friend on the football team, at that time I wouldn't have really known.
Oh, okay.
My first choice, the hero of heroes that I had, was a man by the name of Marshall Goldberg,
Oh.
who was Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
He's still alive.
Is that right?
He must be around his early 80s now. And he was a star halfback for Pittsburgh Pits.
Oh.
The Pittsburgh, Pitt, they call him Pitt.
Were they professional?
No,
Oh.
college university, professional. In those days, there was Duquesne and Carnegie Tech, and later it became Carnegie Mellon, and Pittsburgh University, University of Pittsburgh. Penn State either didn't exist or was insignificant.
Okay.
There was a couple of great colleges in Philadelphia, University of Pennsylvania,
Mm-hmm.
Temple University, as I mentioned, Duquesne. There were a couple of small teacher colleges, but the big powerhouse football team in Pennsylvania was the University of Pittsburgh. And Marshall Goldberg, and I still have a picture of him,
Really?
running with, with
Wow.
he was my hero.
Okay, so you probably would have wanted to go there.
And my friend who taught me football, who was my next door neighbor, went to the University of Pittsburgh.
Okay.
My other friend, Sidney Marin's brother, who also helped me a little bit, although not as much as George, his name was George Klein. Sam never made a big score in college because he was too small.
Okay.
Although I don't really know what happened. I don't think he went to college, but I'm not sure. My other neighbor, Pat, his last name was Pat. I can't think of his first name right now. He had 2 or 3 brothers, all big guys. He was a successful football player. But my friend Rabbit Ward was offered a college scholarship. I found out later on.
Okay.
My friend Steve Latch and his brother Joe were offered scholarships, and they went to Duke.
Wow.
Steve became an All-American at Duke. Now, he was a couple of years older than me. He later became a professional. So Duke was the second team I would have chosen.
Is that right? That was big then, too, Duke?
It was pretty big, yeah. It was about the time the war started.
Okay. So it sounds like
I didn't have that choice. Nobody solicited me to be a star at that team.
I'm sure they would have, though, had you been able to stay.
Maybe yes, maybe not. I don't know.
Because you were tall for a running back.
You got to remember, there was still, Jews were not highly thought of in sports.
Really?
The only sport they were ever highly thought of in those days was boxing.
Is that a fact?
There were many
You don't think of Jewish people as
Sometimes
boxers.
they boxed under Irish names.
Oh.
But we had many good Jewish boxers.
You know, I have to be honest with you. I don't think of Jewish people as
No,
boxers.
people didn't, but that was their way of getting out of the ghetto. And
Wow.
getting out of the poorhouse.
Okay.
There were many of them in Philadelphia, New York, and other cities. We had a cousin in Philadelphia, my father's first cousin. He fought under the name of Snakey Bernstein.
Oh.
And he was very good. He never won a championship, but
Yeah.
he was, I believe he was a light heavyweight.
He'd earn enough money, though,
He
to...
earned enough money
Yeah.
to pay the groceries.
Right.
You know, this was before World War II.
Okay.
And, I think by that time he went in the army. He didn't fight professionally anymore. Altoona, I don't know that we had any fights in Altoona. There was never any that I ever, other
All right.
private ones.
Yeah.
Never any that I was aware of.
But anyway, you know, you were tall enough and fast enough, and you had razzle-dazzle. I'm sure somebody would have wanted you.
Good grade.
Yeah.
So that could